Laches or Courage by Plato. Introduction. Laches, by Plato, is a philosophical dialogue that explores the concept of courage or bravery. The conversation takes place between Socrates and two Athenian generals, Laches and Nicias. The main question addressed is, what is courage, and can it be taught? As the characters engage in a back-and-forth discussion, they attempt to define courage and explore whether it is a quality that can be instilled through education. The dialogue unfolds with Socratic questioning, examining various examples of courage in both military and everyday contexts. However, by the end of the dialogue, no clear definition of courage is reached. Laches leaves the concept of courage open-ended, inviting readers to contemplate the complexities of virtue and whether bravery can truly be taught or if it is an inherent quality. Characters of the dialogue: Lysimachus, son of Aristides. Melesus, son of Thucydides. Their sons: Nicias, Laches, Socrates.
You have witnessed the exhibition of the man fighting in armor, Nicias, and Laches, but at the time, we did not disclose the reason my friend Melesus and I invited you to accompany us and see him. It is only fair that we confess our intentions now, as we should not withhold anything from you. The reason was that we intended to seek your advice. Some people scoff at the idea of giving advice to others and, when asked, refuse to express their thoughts. They speculate about the desires of the person seeking advice and responding accordingly, rather than offering their own opinions. However, knowing that you are discerning judges who will speak honestly, we have included you in our discussions. The matter I am about to discuss is as follows: Melesus and I have two sons. This is his son, named Thucydides after his grandfather, and this is mine, also named after his grandfather, Aristides. We have resolved to take great care of our sons and not allow them to roam freely, as is often the case with young people when they are no longer children. Instead, we want to begin immediately and do everything in our power to guide them. Since we know that you also have sons of your own, we thought that you would be the most suitable people to have attended to their education and development. And if, by chance, you have not done so, we would like to remind you that you should have, and we invite you to assist us in fulfilling this shared responsibility. Nicias and Laches, even if it means being long-winded, I will explain how we came to consider this matter. Melesus and I live together, and our sons live with us. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be completely open with you. Both of us often talk to our boys about the many noble deeds our own fathers performed in times of war and peace, in managing alliances, and in governing the city. However, neither of us has any accomplishments of our own to show them. The truth is, we are ashamed for them to see this contrast, and we blame our fathers for allowing us to be spoiled during our youth while they were preoccupied with the concerns of others. We impress upon our sons that they will not grow up to be honorable if they are rebellious and do not take care of themselves. We tell them that if they try, they may become worthy of the names they bear. They, in turn, promise to comply with our wishes. Our concern now is to determine which studies or pursuits are most likely to be beneficial for them. Someone recommended to us the art of fighting in armor, which they believe to be an excellent skill for a young man to learn. They praised the man whose exhibition you witnessed and advised us to see him. We decided to go and asked you to accompany us. At the same time, if you do not object, we intend to seek your counsel on the education of our sons. That is the matter we wanted to discuss with you, and we hope that you will provide your opinion on the art of fighting in armor and any other studies or pursuits that may or may not be desirable for a young man to learn. Please let us know if you agree to our proposal.
As far as I am concerned, Lysimachus and Melesus, I commend your intention and will gladly assist you. I believe you, Laches, will also be pleased.
Certainly, Nicias. I fully agree with the point Lysimachus made about his own father and Melesus' father, which applies not only to them but also to us and anyone involved in public affairs. As he said, such individuals are often negligent and careless when it comes to their own children and personal matters. There is much truth in your remark, Lysimachus. But instead of consulting us, why don't you consult our friend Socrates about the education of the young men? He is from the same community as you and always spends his time in places where young people engage in noble studies or pursuits, which you are inquiring about.
Laches, has Socrates ever paid attention to matters of this kind?
Indeed, Lysimachus.
I can vouch for that, just like Laches can. Recently, he provided me with a music teacher for my sons, Damon, a student of Agathocles. Damon is an incredibly accomplished individual in every way, not just as a musician. He is an invaluable companion for young men at their age.
Socrates, Nicias, and Laches, people of my age tend to lose touch with the younger generation because they are usually confined to their homes due to old age. However, you, son of Socrates, should share any advice you can offer with your fellow community members. Furthermore, I have a special claim on you as an old friend of your father. He and I were always companions and friends, and we never had any disagreements until the day he passed away. When you mentioned your name, it reminded me that I have heard these boys talking to each other at home, often speaking highly of Socrates. However, I never thought to ask them if they were referring to the son of Socrates. Tell me, my boys, is this the Socrates about which you have often talked?
Yes, father, this is him.
I am delighted to hear, Socrates, that you carry on the name of your father, who was an excellent man. I am also happy at the prospect of our family ties being renewed.
Indeed, Lysimachus, you should not give him up. I can assure you that I have seen him upholding not only his father's name, but also the name of his country. He was my companion in the retreat from Delium, and I can tell you that if others had been like him, our country's honor would have been upheld and the great defeat would never have happened.
That is extremely high praise that is given to you, Socrates, by trustworthy witnesses for actions like those they praise. Let me tell you how pleased I am to hear of your fame, and I hope that you will consider me one of your closest friends. You should have visited us long ago and made yourself at home with us. But now, since we have finally found each other, do as I say, get to know me and these young men, so that I can continue to be your friend, just as I was your father's. I expect you to do so, and I will remind you of your duty in the future. But what do you think of the matter we were starting to discuss, the art of fighting in armor? Is that something that the young men can be advantageously taught?
I will try to advise you, Lysimachus, as best I can on this matter, and I will also comply with your wishes in every way. However, since I am younger and less experienced, I think it would be best for me to first hear what my elders have to say and learn from them. If I have anything to add, then I can give my opinion to them as well as to you. So, Nicias or someone else, why don't you start?
I have no objection, Socrates. In my opinion, the acquisition of this skill is useful to young men in many ways. It is advantageous for them to have an activity among their favorite pastimes that improves their physical health rather than harming it. No form of exercise is better or more challenging than this, and the art of riding is also most suitable for a free man. Only those who are trained in the use of weapons are the athletes of our military profession, trained in what the conflict depends on. Moreover, in actual battle, when you have to fight alongside others in a line, this skill will be somewhat useful, and it will be even more useful when the ranks are broken and you have to fight individually, either in pursuit when you are attacking someone who is defending themselves, or in retreat when you have to defend yourself against an assailant. Certainly, someone who possesses this skill would not be harmed by a single person, or perhaps even by several people. In any case, they would have a great advantage. Furthermore, this kind of skill inclines a person to love other noble lessons. Every person who has learned how to fight in armor will want to learn the proper arrangement of an army, which is the next step after this lesson. And once they have learned that and their ambition is ignited, they will go on to learn the complete art of being a general. It is not difficult to see that knowledge and practice of other military arts will be honorable and valuable to a person, and this lesson may be the beginning of them. Let me add another advantage, which is not insignificant, that this knowledge will make a person much braver and more composed in the field. And I will not hesitate to mention what some may consider a small matter: it will make a better impression at the right time, that is, at the time when their appearance will strike fear in their enemies. So, Lysimachus, as I said, that the young men should be taught this art, for the reasons I have given. But Laches may have a different view, and I would be extremely glad to hear what he has to say.
I would not argue, Nicias, that any kind of knowledge should not be learned, for all knowledge seems to be good. And if, as Nicias and the teachers of this art claim, the use of arms is truly a form of knowledge, then it should be learned. But if not, and if those who claim to teach it are only deceivers, or if it is knowledge but not of a valuable kind, then what is the use of learning it? I say this because I think that if it were truly valuable, the Spartans, whose entire lives are dedicated to discovering and practicing the arts that give them an advantage in war over other nations, would have discovered this one. And even if they had not, these teachers of the art would certainly not have failed to realize that the Spartans, more than any other Greeks, have the greatest interest in such matters, and that a master of this art who was honored among them would surely find success among other nations, just as a tragic poet would who is honored among us. This is why someone who believes they can write a tragedy does not go around performing in neighboring states, but comes straight here to Athens and performs. And this is natural. While I understand that these armored fighters consider Lacedaemon to be a sacred and inviolable territory, which they do not touch with their feet, they instead travel around the neighboring states and prefer to display their skills to others rather than to the Spartans. They especially seek out those who openly admit that they are not the best in the art of war. Furthermore, Lysimachus, I have encountered many of these fighters in actual combat and have assessed their abilities, which I can share with you now. None of these experts in combat have ever distinguished themselves in war. There seems to be a kind of unfortunate fate surrounding them. While in other arts, the notable individuals are usually those who have practiced the art, these fighters seem to be an exception. For instance, this Thessalus, whom you and I just witnessed boasting about his skills, I have seen him in another situation where he unintentionally displayed himself in a much more entertaining manner. He was a sailor on a ship that collided with a transport vessel, armed with a weapon that was half spear, half scythe. The uniqueness of this weapon matched the uniqueness of the man. To make a long story short, let me tell you what happened to this remarkable scythe spear. He was fighting, and the scythe got caught in the rigging of the other ship and became stuck. He pulled and tugged, but could not free his weapon. The two ships were passing each other, and as he ran along his own ship, holding onto the spear, the other ship pulled him along. Eventually, he let go of the spear, and all that remained in his hand was the end of the handle. The people on the transport vessel clapped and laughed at his ridiculous appearance. When someone threw a stone that landed on the deck at his feet, he let go of the scythe spear, and even the crew of his own ship burst out laughing when they saw the weapon suspended in the air from the transport vessel. Now, I do not deny that there may be some value in this art, as Nicias claims, but I can only speak from my own experience. And based on that, whether this is an art with minimal advantages or simply a deception, either way, it is not worth pursuing. In my opinion, if a practitioner of this art is a coward, he is likely to become reckless, and his reputation will only become more notorious. And if he is brave, but fails even slightly, others will be quick to criticize him. There is a jealousy towards such pretenders, and unless a man is exceptionally brave, he will inevitably appear ridiculous if he claims to possess this kind of skill. That is my assessment, Lysimachus, of the desirability of this art. But, as I mentioned earlier, ask Socrates, and do not let him go until he gives you his opinion on the matter. I am going to ask you a favor, Socrates, because the two counselors disagree, and we still need someone to decide between them. If they had agreed, we would not need an arbiter. But since Laches voted one way and Nicias another, I would like to hear which of our two friends you agree with. Lysimachus, are you going to accept the opinion of the majority? Yes, Socrates, what else am I supposed to do? And Laches, would you do the same? If you were deliberating about the physical training of your son, would you follow the advice of the majority or the opinion of someone who had been trained and exercised under a skilled expert? The latter, Socrates, as that would be reasonable. So, his single vote would be worth more than the votes of all four of us? Certainly. And I imagine it is because a good decision is based on knowledge, not numbers? To be sure. Then we must first ask if any of us has knowledge about what we are deliberating. If someone does, let us follow their advice, even if they are the only one, and disregard the rest. If no one does, then we should seek further counsel. Is this a trivial matter that you and Lysimachus are deliberating? Aren't you risking your most valuable possessions? For your children is your riches, and the entire order of your household depends on whether they turn out well or not. That is true. So, great care is required in this matter? Certainly. Suppose, as I was saying earlier, that we were considering who the best trainer is. Wouldn't we choose someone who knows and has practiced the art and has had the best teachers? I believe we would. But wouldn't there be a prior question about the nature of the art we want to find the experts in? I do not understand. Let me try to clarify. I do not think we have yet decided what we are consulting about when we ask who among us is skilled in art and has had a teacher of the art. Why, Socrates, isn't the question whether young men should learn the art of fighting in armor? Yes, Nicias, but there is a prior question that I can illustrate this way. When someone considers applying medicine to their eyes, would you say they are consulting about the medicine or about their eyes? About their eyes.
And when he considers whether he should put a bridle on a horse and when, he is thinking about the horse and not the bridle.
True.
And in short, when he considers something for the sake of another thing, he thinks about the end and not the means.
Certainly.
And when you seek advice, you should see if the advisor is skilled in achieving the end you have in mind.
Very true.
And currently, we have in mind some knowledge, with the end being the development of young souls.
Yes.
And we are investigating which of us is skilled or successful in the nurturing of the soul, and which of us has had good teachers.
Well, Socrates, have you never noticed that some people who have had no teachers are more skilled than those who have in certain things?
Yes, Laches, I have noticed that. But you would not be very willing to trust them if they only claim to be experts in their art unless they could show some proof of their skill or excellence in one or more works.
That is true.
And therefore, Laches and Nicias, since Lysimachus and Milesius have sought our advice on improving the minds of their sons, we should also tell them who our teachers were, if we claim to have had any, and prove that they were first and foremost men of merit and experienced mentors of young minds, and that they were truly our teachers. Or if any of us says that he has no teacher, but can show his own works, then he should point out to them which Athenians or foreigners, whether free or enslaved, he is generally acknowledged to have influenced positively. But if he can show neither teachers nor works, then he should tell them to seek out others and not risk harming the children of friends, thereby incurring the most serious accusation that can be brought against anyone by those closest to him. As for myself, Lysimachus and Milesius, I am the first to admit that I have never had a teacher of the art of virtue, although I have always desired to have one since my earliest youth. But I am too poor to pay the sophists, who are the only ones who claim to teach moral improvement. And to this day, I have never been able to discover art myself, although I would not be surprised if Nicias or Laches discovered or learned it, for they are much wealthier than I am and may have learned from others. And they are also older, so they have had more time to make the discovery. And they can educate a person, for if they were not confident in their own knowledge, they would never have spoken so decisively about the pursuits that are beneficial or harmful to a young man. I trust both, but I am surprised to find that they disagree with each other. Therefore, Lysimachus, since Laches suggested that you should keep me here and not let me go until I answer, I in turn earnestly implore and advise you to keep Laches and Nicias here and question them. I would have you say to them, Socrates claims that he has no knowledge of the matter, he is unable to decide who speaks the truth between you. He is neither a discoverer nor a student of anything of the sort. But you, Laches and Nicias, should each of you tell us who is the most skilled educator you have ever known, and whether you invented the art yourselves or learned it from another. And if you learned it, who are your respective teachers, and who are their colleagues in the art? And if you are too occupied with politics to teach us yourselves, let us go to them and offer them gifts or seek their favor, or both, in the hope that they may be persuaded to take charge of our children and yours, so that they will not grow up inferior and bring shame to their ancestors. But if you yourselves are original discoverers in that field, give us some proof of your skill. Who are the people who, under your care, have transformed from being inferior individuals to becoming good and noble? For if this is your first attempt at education, there is a danger that you may be experimenting not on the vile corpus of a carrion slave, but on your own sons or the sons of your friend, and, as the proverb says, break the large vessel in learning to make pots. So, tell us, what qualities do you claim or not claim? Make them tell you that, Lysimachus, and do not let them off.
I greatly approve of Socrates' words, my friends. But you, Nicias, and Laches, must decide whether you will be questioned and provide an explanation about matters of this kind. Milesius and I would be incredibly pleased to hear you answer the questions that Socrates asks, if you are willing. I began by saying that we sought your advice because we thought you would pay attention to the subject, especially since you have children who, like our own, are almost of the age to be educated. So, if you have no objection, let us say that you enter a partnership with Socrates, and you and he ask and answer each other's questions. As he rightly said, we are deliberating about the most important of our concerns. I hope that you will agree to our request.
I can see clearly, Lysimachus, that you have only known Socrates' father and have no acquaintance with Socrates himself. At most, you may have known him when he was a child and may have encountered him among his peers, in the company of his father, at a sacrifice, or at some other gathering. You clearly demonstrate that you have never known him since he reached adulthood. Why do you say that, Nicias? Because it seems that you are unaware that anyone who has a mental connection with Socrates and engages in conversation with him is likely to be drawn into an argument. And no matter what subject he initiates, he will continuously circle back to it until he finds himself having to give an account of both his present and past life. Once entangled, Socrates will not release him until he has thoroughly examined him. I am accustomed to his ways, and I know that he will certainly do as I say, and I will be the one to suffer. I enjoy his conversation, Lysimachus. And there is no harm in being reminded of any wrongdoing that we are currently engaged in or have done in the past. Those who do not shy away from criticism will pay more attention to their future actions. As Solon says, they will desire to continue learning for as long as they live and will not believe that old age alone brings wisdom. Being cross-examined by Socrates is neither unusual nor unpleasant to me. In fact, I knew all along that when Socrates is present, the argument will soon shift from our sons to ourselves. Therefore, I am willing to engage in discourse with Socrates in his own manner. However, you should ask our friend Laches about his feelings on the matter. I have only one feeling, Nicias, or should I say, two feelings, about discussions. Some may think that I am a lover of discourse, while others may see me as a hater of it. When I hear a man discussing virtue or any kind of wisdom, and he is a true man worthy of his subject, I am delighted beyond measure. I compare the man and his words and observe the harmony and correspondence between them. I consider such a person to be a true musician, attuned to a more beautiful harmony than that of the lyre or any pleasant musical instrument. Truly, he has a harmony of words and actions in his own life, arranged not in the Ionian, Phrygian, or Lydian mode, but in the true Hellenic mode, which is the Dorian mode. Such a person brings me joy with the sound of his voice, and when I hear him, I am seen as a lover of discourse because I eagerly absorb his words. However, a man whose actions do not align with his words annoys me. The better he speaks, the more I dislike him, and then I appear to be a hater of discourse. As for Socrates, I have no knowledge of his words, but it seems that I have had experience of his actions for a long time. His actions demonstrate that he possesses free and noble sentiments. If his words align with his actions, then I agree with him and would be delighted to be questioned by a man like him. I would not be bothered by having to learn from him. I also agree with Solon that I would like to grow old while continuously learning many things. However, I must add that I only desire to learn about what is good. Socrates must be willing to acknowledge that he is a good teacher, or else I will be a dull and incompatible student. However, his age or lack of reputation is of no consequence to me. Therefore, Socrates, I inform you that you may teach and challenge me as much as you like, and I am also willing to learn anything that I know from you. I hold a high opinion of you ever since the day you were my companion in danger and displayed valor that only a deserving man can possess. Therefore, say whatever you wish, and do not concern yourself with our age difference. I cannot say that either of you show any reluctance to seek counsel and advice from me. But this is our proper task, and it is yours as well, for I consider you to be one of us. So please take my place and find out from Nicias and Laches what we need to know for the sake of the young men. Engage in conversation and consultation with them, for I am old, and my memory is failing. I do not remember the questions I am about to ask or the answers to them, and if there is any interruption, I am completely lost. Therefore, I ask that you continue the proposed discussion among yourselves, and I will listen. Milesias and I will act based on your conclusions. Let us, Nicias, and Laches, comply with the request of Lysimachus and Milesias. There is no harm in asking ourselves the question that was first posed to us: who have been our own instructors in this type of training and whom have we improved? However, the other method of conducting the inquiry will lead us to the same point and will be more like starting from first principles. If we knew that adding something would improve another thing and we were able to make that addition, then clearly, we must know how to attain best and most easily what we are advising. Perhaps you do not understand what I mean. Allow me to clarify by using an example. Suppose we knew that adding sight improves the eyes that possess this ability, and we were also able to give sight to the eyes. Then clearly, we would know the nature of sight and be able to advise on how to attain this gift of sight best and most easily. But if we knew neither what sight is nor what hearing is, we would not be particularly good medical advisors regarding the eyes or ears, or about the best way to give sight and hearing to them.
That is true, Socrates.
And aren't our two friends, Laches, currently inviting us to discuss how to impart the gift of virtue to their sons for their intellectual improvement?
Very true.
Then should we not first understand the nature of virtue? How can we advise someone on the best way to attain something if we are completely ignorant about it?
I do not think we can, Socrates.
So, Laches, can we assume that we know the nature of virtue?
Yes.
And if we know something, we should be able to explain it, right?
Certainly.
My friend, I suggest that we do not start by investigating the entirety of virtue, as that may be more than we can handle. Let us first consider if we have sufficient knowledge of a part of virtue. This will make the inquiry easier for us.
Let us do as you say, Socrates.
So, which part of virtue should we focus on? Shouldn't we choose the part that is believed to be related to the skill of fighting in armor? And isn't that generally considered to be courage?
Yes, certainly.
Then, Laches, let us begin by determining the nature of courage, and then proceed to investigate how young men can attain this quality through studies and pursuits. Tell me, if you can, what courage is.
Indeed, Socrates, I see no difficulty in answering that. A man of courage is someone who does not run away but stays and fights against the enemy. There can be no mistake about that.
Very good, Laches. However, I fear that I did not express myself clearly, and therefore you answered a different question to the one I intended to ask.
What do you mean, Socrates?
Let me explain. You will call a man courageous if he remains at his post and fights with the enemy, right?
Certainly I would.
And so would I. But what would you say about another man who fights while retreating instead of staying?
What do you mean by retreating?
I mean fighting in the way that the Scythians are said to fight, both pursuing and retreating. Just as Homer praises the horses of Aeneas for their ability to pursue and quickly move in different directions, he also praises Aeneas himself for his knowledge of fear or retreat, calling him an author of fear or flight.
Yes, Socrates and Homer are right in that case. He was talking about chariots, just as you were talking about the Scythian cavalry, who fought in that way. But the heavily armed Greek soldiers, as I said, fight by staying in their ranks.
And yet, Laches, we must make an exception for the Lacedaemonians at Plataea. When they encountered the light shields of the Persians, they were said to have fled instead of standing and fighting. But when the Persian ranks were broken, they turned around and attacked them like cavalry, winning the Battle of Plataea.
That is true.
That was my point when I said that I was to blame for asking the question poorly, and that is why you answered poorly. Because I meant to ask not only about the courage of heavily armed soldiers, but also about the courage of cavalry and every other type of soldier. I meant to ask about those who are courageous in war, as well as those who are courageous in perils at sea, in disease, in poverty, or in politics. I meant to ask about those who are courageous against pain or fear, but also those who are strong enough to resist desires and pleasures, whether they stay in their ranks or turn against their enemy. This is the kind of courage I am referring to, Laches.
Certainly, Socrates.
And all these people are courageous, but some have courage in pleasures, some in pains, some in desires, and some in fears. And under the same conditions, some are cowards, I imagine.
Very true.
Now, I was asking about courage and cowardice in general. And I will start with courage and ask again, what is that common quality that is called courage and includes all the different uses of the term when applied to both pleasure and pain, and in all the cases I mentioned earlier?
I would say that courage is a kind of endurance of the soul, if I am to speak of the universal nature that pervades them all.
But that is what we must do if we are to answer the question. However, I cannot say that every kind of endurance should be considered courage, in my opinion. Let me explain my REA.
I am sure, Laches, that you would consider courage to be a very noble quality.
Most noble, certainly.
And you would say that wise endurance is also good and noble?
Very noble.
But what would you say about foolish endurance? Is that to be regarded as evil and harmful?
True.
And is anything noble that is evil and harmful?
I should not say that, Socrates.
Then you would not consider that kind of endurance to be courage, because it is not noble, but courage is noble?
You are right.
So, according to you, only wise endurance is courage?
True.
But as for the term wise in what? In all things, both small and great? For example, if a man shows the quality of endurance in spending his money wisely, knowing that by spending he will acquire more in the end, do you call him courageous?
Certainly not.
Or, for example, if a man is a physician, and his son or some patient of his has inflammation of the lungs, and begs to be allowed to eat or drink something, and the other is firm and refuses, is that courage?
No, that is not courage at all, just like the last example.
Again, consider the case of someone who endures in war, and is willing to fight, and wisely calculates and knows that others will help him, and that there will be fewer and inferior men against him than there are with him, and suppose that he also has advantages of position. Would you say that such a person who endures with all this wisdom and preparation, or some man in the opposing army who is in the opposite circumstances and yet endures and remains at his post, is the braver?
I would say that the latter, Socrates, is the braver.
But surely, this is a foolish endurance in comparison to the other?
That is true.
Then you would say that someone who endures in an engagement of cavalry, having the knowledge of horsemanship, is not as courageous as someone who endures without such knowledge?
That's what I would say.
And someone who endures, having knowledge of the use of the sling, or the bow, or any other art, is not as courageous as someone who endures without such knowledge?
True.
And someone who descends into a well, and dives, and holds out in this or any similar action, having no knowledge of diving or the like, is, as you would say, more courageous than those who have this knowledge?
Well, Socrates, what else can a man say?
Nothing if that is what he thinks.
But that is what I do think.
And yet men who thus run risks and endure are foolish, Laches, in comparison to those who do the same things, having the skill to do them.
That is true.
But foolish boldness and endurance appeared before to be base and harmful to us.
Quite true.
Whereas courage was acknowledged to be a noble quality.
True.
And now, on the contrary, we are saying that the foolish endurance, which was previously held in dishonor, is courage.
Very true.
And are we right in saying so?
Indeed, Socrates, I am sure that we are not right.
Then according to your statement, you and I, Laches, are not attuned to the Dorian mode, which is a harmony of words and deeds, for our deeds are not in accordance with our words. Anyone would say that we had courage who saw us in action, but not, I imagine, he who heard us talking about courage just now.
That is most true.
And is this condition of ours satisfactory?
Quite the opposite.
Suppose, however, that we admit the principle of which we are speaking to a certain extent.
To what extent and what principle do you mean?
The principle of endurance. We too must endure and persevere in the inquiry, and then courage will not laugh at our faint-heartedness in searching for courage, which after all may, highly likely, be endurance.
I am ready to continue, Socrates, although I am not accustomed to investigations of this sort. But the spirit of controversy has been aroused in me by what has been said, and I am truly grieved at being unable to express my meaning. For I believe that I do know the nature of courage, but, somehow or other, she has slipped away from me, and I cannot grasp her and explain her nature.
But, my dear friend, shouldn't the good sportsman follow the track and not be lazy?
Certainly, he should.
And shall we invite Nicias to join us? He may be better at the sport than we are. What do you say?
I would like that.
Come then, Nicias, and do what you can to help your friends, who are struggling with the waves of argument and at their last breath. You see our extremity, and you may save us and also settle your own opinion, if you will tell us what you think about courage.
I have been thinking, Socrates, that you and Laches are not defining courage in the right way, for you have forgotten an excellent saying which I have heard from your own lips.
What is it, Nicias?
I have often heard you say that every man is good in that in which he is wise, and bad in that in which he is unwise.
That is certainly true, Nicias.
And therefore, if the brave man is good, he is also wise.
Do you hear him, Laches?
Yes, I hear him, but I do not quite understand him.
I understand him, and he seems to me to mean that courage is a kind of wisdom.
What could he possibly mean, Socrates?
That is a question you must ask him yourself.
Yes.
Then tell him, Nicias, what you mean by this wisdom. Surely you do not mean the wisdom of playing the flute.
Certainly not.
Nor the wisdom of playing the lyre.
No.
But what is this knowledge then, and about what?
You asked him the question very well, Socrates, and I would like him to explain the nature of this knowledge or wisdom.
I mean to say, Laches, that courage is the knowledge of what inspires fear or confidence in war, or in anything else.
How strangely he is talking, Socrates.
Why do you say that, Laches?
Well, surely courage is one thing, and wisdom is another.
That is exactly what Nicias denies.
Yes, that is what he denies, but he is so foolish.
Suppose we instruct him instead of insulting him?
Laches does not want to instruct me, Socrates, but having been proven to be talking nonsense himself, he wants to prove that I have been doing the same.
Very true, Nicias, and you are talking nonsense, as I will try to show. Let me ask you a question. Do physicians know the dangers of disease? Or do the courageous know them? Or are physicians the same as the courageous?
Not at all.
No more than farmers who know the dangers of farming, or other craftsmen who have knowledge of what inspires fear or confidence in their own arts, and yet they are not courageous because of that.
What is Laches saying, Nicias? He seems to be saying something important.
Yes, he is saying something, but it is not true.
How so?
Well, because he does not see that the physician's knowledge only extends to the nature of health and disease, he can tell the sick person no more than that. Do you think, Laches, that the physician knows whether health or disease is more terrible to a person? Hasn't many a person been better off not getting out of bed when sick? I would like to know if you think that life is always better than death. Isn't death often the better option?
Yes, certainly in my opinion.
And do you think that the same things are terrible to those who would be better off dead, and to those who would be better off alive?
Certainly not.
And do you suppose that the physician or any other artist knows this, or anyone else for that matter, except for someone skilled in the reasons for fear and hope? And I call that person courageous.
Do you understand what he means, Laches?
Yes, I suppose that, in his way of speaking, the fortune-tellers are courageous. For whom but one of them can know whether it is better to live or to die? And yet, Nicias, would you admit that you yourself are a fortune-teller, or are you neither a fortune-teller nor courageous?
What? Do you mean to say that the fortune-teller should know the reasons for hope or fear?
Indeed I do. Who else but them?
Rather, I would say it is the person I am talking about, for the fortune-teller should only know the signs of things that are about to happen, whether it be death or disease, or loss of property or victory or defeat in war, or in any kind of contest, but whether suffering or not suffering from these things will be for the best, can no more be decided by the fortune-teller than by someone who is not a fortune-teller.
I cannot understand what Nicias is trying to say, Socrates, because he portrays the courageous person as neither a fortune-teller, nor a physician, nor any other character, unless he means to say that they are God. He does not want to honestly admit that he is talking nonsense, but he is trying to hide the difficulty he has gotten himself into. You and I, Socrates, might have done a similar thing just now, if we had wanted to avoid appearing inconsistent. And if we were arguing in a court of law, there might have been a reason to do so, but why should a person adorn themselves with empty words at a gathering of friends like this?
I completely agree with you, Laches, that he should not. But perhaps Nicias is serious, and not just talking for the sake of talking. Let us ask him to explain what he means, and if he has reason on his side, we will agree with him. If not, we will teach him.
Socrates, if you like, you can ask him. I think I have asked enough.
I do not see why I should not, and my question will suffice for both of us.
Very well.
Then tell me, Nicias, or rather tell us, since Laches and I are partners in this argument, do you affirm that courage is the knowledge of the reasons for hope and fear?
I do.
And not every person has this knowledge. Physicians and fortune-tellers do not have it, and they will not be courageous unless they acquire it. That is what you were saying?
That's right.
So this is certainly not something that every pig would know, as the proverb says, and therefore a pig could not be called courageous.
I think not.
Clearly not, Nicias. Not even a big pig like the Crommyonian sow would be considered courageous by you. And I say this not as a joke, but because I believe that anyone who agrees with your doctrine, that courage is the knowledge of the reasons for fear and hope, cannot admit that any wild animal is courageous, unless they admit that a lion, or a leopard, or perhaps a boar, or any other animal, has such a degree of wisdom that they know things that only a few human beings ever know due to their difficulty. He who agrees with your perspective on courage must affirm that a lion, a stag, a bull, and a monkey have equally little claims to courage.
Excellent point, Socrates, by the gods, which is profoundly good. And I hope, Nicias, that you will tell us whether these animals, which we all admit being courageous, are wiser than humans, or whether you will have the audacity, in the face of universal opinion, to deny their courage.
Why, Laches, I do not consider animals or any other things that have no fear of dangers, because they are ignorant of them, courageous, but only fearless and senseless. Do you think that I would call little children courageous, who fear no dangers because they know none? In my opinion, there is a difference between fearlessness and courage. Thoughtful courage is a quality possessed by very few, but that recklessness and boldness, and fearlessness without forethought, are quite common qualities possessed by many men, many women, many children, and many animals. And you, and men in general, call actions that I consider reckless as courageous. My courageous actions are wise actions.
Look, Socrates, how admirably, in his opinion, he dresses himself up in words, while trying to deprive those whom the whole world acknowledges as courageous of the honor of courage.
Not so, Laches, but do not be alarmed, for I am quite willing to say of you and of Lamachus, and of many other Athenians, that you are courageous and therefore wise.
I could answer that, but I would not have you accuse me of being arrogant.
Do not answer him, Laches. I suspect that you are not aware of the source from which his wisdom is derived. He has acquired all this from my friend Damon, and Damon is always with Prodicus, who, among all the sophists, is the best at dissecting words of this sort.
Yes, Socrates, and the examination of such subtleties is a much more suitable occupation for a sophist than for a great statesman whom the city chooses to lead her.
Yes, my dear friend, but a great statesman is likely to have great intelligence. And the view implied in Nicias' definition of courage is worthy of examination.
Then examine for yourself, Socrates.
That is what I am going to do, my dear friend. However, do not suppose that I will exclude you from the discussion, for I expect you to engage your mind and join me in considering the question.
I will if you think I should.
Yes, I do, but I must ask you, Nicias, to start again. You remember that we originally considered courage to be a part of virtue.
Very true.
And you yourself said that it was a part, and there were many other parts, all of which together are called virtue.
Certainly.
Do you agree with me about the parts? Because I say that justice, temperance, and the like, are all parts of virtue as well as courage. Would you not say the same?
Certainly.
Well then, so far, we agree. And now let us take a step further and try to reach a similar agreement about the fearful and the hopeful. I do not want you to be thinking one thing and myself another. Let me tell you my own opinion, and if I am wrong, you shall correct me. In my opinion, the terrible and the hopeful are the things that do or do not create fear, and fear is not of the present or the past, but of future and anticipated evil. Do you not agree with that, Laches?
Yes, Socrates, completely.
That is my view, Nicias. The terrible things, as I would say, are the future evils, and the hopeful things are the good or not evil things that are in the future. Do you agree or disagree with me?
I agree.
And you call the knowledge of these things courage?
Exactly.
And now let me see if you agree with Laches and myself on a third point.
What is that?
I will tell you. He and I have the notion that there is not one knowledge or science of the past, another of the present, and a third of what is likely to be best and what will be best in the future, but that there is only one science for all three. For example, there is one science of medicine that deals with the examination of health equally in all times, present, past, and future, and one science of agriculture in the same way, which deals with the products of the earth in all times. As for the art of the general, you yourselves can testify that he has excellent foresight of the future, and that he claims to be the master and not the servant of the soothsayer, because he knows better what is happening or is likely to happen in war, and accordingly, the law places the soothsayer under the general, and not the general under the soothsayer. Am I not correct in saying so, Laches?
Absolutely correct.
And do you, Nicias, also acknowledge that the same science understands the same things, whether they are future, present, or past?
Yes, indeed, Socrates, that is my opinion.
And courage, my friend, is, as you say, a knowledge of the fearful and the hopeful?
Yes.
And the fearful and the hopeful are recognized as future goods and future evils?
True.
And does the same science deal with the same things in the future or at any time?
That is true.
Then courage is not the study that deals with fear and hope, because they are only concerned with the future. Courage, like other studies, is not only concerned with the good and evil of the future, but also of the present and past, and of any time, right?
That, as I understand, is true.
So the answer you gave, Nicias, only covers a third part of courage. But our question was about the whole nature of courage. And according to your view, courage is not just the knowledge of hope and fear but seems to include almost every good and evil without regard to time. What do you say to change your statement?
I agree, Socrates.
But then, my dear friend, if a person knew all good and evil, and how they are, have been, and will be produced, wouldn't they be perfect and lacking in no virtue, whether it be justice, temperance, or holiness? They would possess them all, and they would know which were dangers and which were not, and guard against them whether they were supernatural or natural. They would also provide the good, as they would know how to deal with both gods and men.
I think, Socrates, that there is a great deal of truth in what you say.
But then, Nicias, according to this new definition of yours, courage, instead of being a part of virtue only, will be all virtue?
It would seem so.
But we were saying that courage is one of the parts of virtue.
Yes, that was what we were saying.
And that contradicts our present view?
That appears to be the case.
Then, Nicias, we have not discovered what courage is.
We have not.
And yet, friend Nicias, I thought that you would have made the discovery when you were so dismissive of the answers I gave to Socrates. I had high hopes that the wisdom of Damon would have enlightened you.
I see, Laches, that you think nothing of displaying your ignorance of the nature of courage, but you only look to see if I have made a similar display. And if we are both equally ignorant of the things that a person who is worth anything should know, then I suppose that will not matter. You certainly seem to me very much like the rest of the world, looking at your neighbor and not at yourself. I think we have said enough on the subject we have been discussing. And if anything has been said imperfectly, it can be corrected later with the help of Damon, whom you try to ridicule even though you have never met him, and with the help of others. And when I am satisfied with myself, I will freely share my satisfaction with you, because you need knowledge.
You are a philosopher, Nicias, and I am aware of that. Nevertheless, I would advise Lysimachus and Meleges not to take you and me as advisors on the education of their children. As I said at first, they should ask Socrates and not let him off the hook. If my own sons were old enough, I would have asked him myself.
I completely agree with that if Socrates is willing to take them under his guidance. I would not want anyone else to be the tutor of Niceratus. But I notice that when I mention the matter to him, he recommends another tutor to me and refuses himself. Perhaps he may be more willing to listen to you, Lysimachus.
He should.
Because I would do things for him that I would not do for many others. What do you say, Socrates? Will you comply? And are you ready to assist in the education of the young men?
Indeed, Lysimachus, it would be very wrong of me to refuse to help in the improvement of anyone. And if I had shown in this conversation that I had knowledge that Nicias and Laches do not, then I admit that you would be right in inviting me to take on this duty. But since we are all in the same confusion, why should one of us be preferred over another? I certainly think that no one should. And under these circumstances, let me offer you some advice, and this need not go beyond ourselves. I believe, my friends, that each of us should seek out the best teacher we can find, first for ourselves, as we are greatly in need of one, and then for the young men, regardless of expense or anything else. But I cannot advise that we remain as we are. And if anyone laughs at us for going to school at our age, I will quote the authority of Homer, who says, "Modesty is not good for a needy man." So let us, regardless of what may be said about us, make the education of the young men our own education.
I like your proposal, Socrates, and as I am the oldest, I am also the most eager to go to school with the boys. Let me ask a favor of you, come to my house tomorrow at dawn, and we will discuss these matters. For now, let us end the conversation.
I will come to you tomorrow, Lysimachus, as you suggest if it is God's will.
All introductions by Benjamin Jowett have been moved to this epilogue translated by Benjamin Jowett. Modern English translation ChatGPT 3.5, editor and facilitator is Sir Adam S. Barnett. Introduction. Lysimachus, the son of Aristides the Just, and Milesius, the son of the elder Thucydides, two elderly men who live together, want to educate their sons in the best possible way. They themselves were not given a proper education, as often happens with the sons of great men. They are determined that their children will receive more care than they did from their fathers. At their request, Nicias and Laches have accompanied them to watch a man named Stesilaus fight in heavy armor. The two fathers asked the two generals for their opinion on this exhibition and whether they would recommend their sons to acquire this skill. Nicias and Laches are willing to give their opinion, but they suggest inviting Socrates to join the discussion. Although Lysimachus does not know Socrates, he is later recognized as the son of his old friend Sophroniscus, with whom he never had any disagreements until his death. Socrates is also known to Nicias, who had introduced the excellent Damon, musician and sophist, as a tutor for his son, and to Laches, who had witnessed Socrates' heroic behavior at the Battle of Delium, compare Swamp. Socrates, being younger than both Nicias and Laches, prefers to wait until they have expressed their opinions, which they do in their own characteristic ways. Nicias, the tactician, strongly supports this new skill, which he describes as the military equivalent of gymnastics, useful when the ranks are formed, and even more useful when they are broken. It generates general interest in military studies and greatly enhances the appearance of a soldier in the field. Laches, the straightforward warrior, believes that such a skill is not knowledge and cannot be of any value because the Spartans, the great experts in warfare, neglect it. His own experience in actual combat has taught him that these pretenders are useless and ridiculous. He has seen this man Stesilaus on board a ship, making an extremely poor display of himself. Possessing this skill will make a coward reckless and subject a courageous person, if they happen to make a mistake, to criticism. Now it is time to consult Socrates. Since they have differing opinions, he must decide. Socrates would rather not decide the question by a majority vote. In such an important matter as the education of a friend's children, he would consult the one skilled person who has had teachers and has works to show as evidence of their skill. This person is not himself, as he has never been able to pay the sophists for instruction and has never had the wit to do or discover anything. However, Nicias and Laches are older and wealthier than he is. They have had teachers and perhaps have made discoveries. He would have trusted them completely if they had not been diametrically opposed. At this point, Lysimachus suggests handing over the argument to the younger members of the group, as he is old and has a poor memory. He earnestly asks Socrates to stay, showing how little he knows the man, who certainly will not leave until he has questioned the company about their past lives. Nicias has often submitted to this process, and Laches is quite willing to learn from Socrates because his actions, in the true Dorian mode, correspond to his words. Socrates continues, "We could ask who our teachers are, but a better and more thorough way to examine the question is to ask, what is virtue? Or rather, to narrow the inquiry down to that part of virtue which concerns the use of weapons, what is courage?" Laches believes he knows the answer. 1. He is courageous who remains at his post. But some nations fight while retreating, like Aeneas in Homer, or like the heavily armed Spartans did at the Battle of Plataea. 2. Socrates wants a more general definition, not only of military courage but of courage in all situations, whether in the face of pleasure or pain. Laches responds that this universal courage is endurance. But courage is a good thing, and mere endurance can be harmful and detrimental. Therefore, 3. The element of intelligence must be added. However, unintelligent endurance may often be more courageous than intelligent endurance, and bad endurance may be more courageous than good endurance. How can this contradiction be resolved? Socrates and Laches are not in agreement in both their words and actions. Their words are all confusion, although their actions are courageous. Nevertheless, they must persist in an argument about endurance. Laches is very willing and is confident that he knows what courage is, if only he could articulate it. Nicias is now appealed to, and in response, he offers a definition that he has heard from Socrates himself, namely, 1. Courage is intelligence. Laches ridicules this definition, and Socrates asks, what kind of intelligence, to which Nicias replies, intelligence of terrible things. But every person knows the things to be feared in their own field of expertise. No, they do not. They may predict outcomes but cannot determine whether they are truly terrible, only the courageous person can determine that. Laches concludes that the courageous person must either be a soothsayer or a god. Furthermore, 2. According to Nicias' way of speaking, the term courageous must be denied to animals or children because they do not know the danger. Laches objects to this inversion of the ordinary use of language but is somewhat mollified by a compliment to his own courage. Nevertheless, he does not like seeing an Athenian statesman and general resorting to such sophistry. Socrates resumes the argument. Courage has been defined as intelligence or knowledge of the terrible, and courage is not the entirety of virtue but only one of its aspects. The terrible is in the future, and therefore knowledge of the terrible is knowledge of the future. But there can be no knowledge of future good or evil without knowledge of past or present good and evil, in other words, knowledge of all good and evil. Therefore, courage is the knowledge of good and evil in general. However, someone who possesses knowledge of good and evil in general must not only have courage, but also temperance, justice, and every other virtue. Thus, a single virtue would be the same as all virtues. And yet, even the two generals and Socrates, the hero of Delium, are still ignorant of the nature of courage. They must go back to school, boys, old men, and all. Some similarities and differences can be observed when comparing the Laches with the Charmides and Lysis. Laches has less poetic and simple beauty, but more dramatic interest and power. It is richer in the external aspects of the scene, with more character development and interaction. In Lysis and Charmides, the youths are the central figures, and the meeting place is a palestra. In the Laches, however, the meeting place, also a palestra, is completely forgotten and the boys play a subordinate role. The discussion is among older men, with Socrates being the youngest. First, there is the aged Lysimachus, who can be compared to Cephalus in the Republic and, like him, withdraws from the argument. Milesius, who is only a shadow of Lysimachus, also falls silent. Both admit to having received a poor education, as evidenced by the fact that Lysimachus, the friend of Sophroniscus, had never heard of the fame of Socrates, his son. They belong to different social circles. In the Meno, their lack of education, except in riding and wrestling, is used as evidence that virtue cannot be taught. The recognition of Socrates by Lysimachus is very graceful, and his military exploits naturally connect him with the two generals, one of whom has witnessed them. The characters of Nicias and Laches are revealed through their opinions on the exhibition of a man fighting in heavy armor. The more enlightened Nicias is willing to accept the new art, while Laches ridicules it and relies on asking, "What do the Lacedaemonians say?" Nicias is the thoughtful general, open to any new discoveries in the art of war, while Laches is the practical man who relies on his own experience and is resistant to change. It is worth noting that one of them is a student of Socrates, while the other only knows of his actions. Laches admires the Dorian mode and remarks that there are some people who, without being taught, are better than those who have been. He is delighted by Socrates' clever arguments and tends to get angry with Nicias' refinements. In the discussion of the main question of the dialogue, what is courage, the contrast between the two characters becomes even more apparent. Both Laches and Nicias hold partial truths. Laches gradually moves from a popular understanding of courage to a more philosophical one but struggles to form a general notion of courage beyond that of a soldier. Once he does form a general notion, it is quickly refuted by Socrates' dialectic, and Nicias presents the Socratic doctrine that courage is knowledge. This knowledge refers to the understanding of future terrible things. However, Socrates denies that knowledge of the future can be separated from knowledge of the past and present. In other words, true knowledge is not that of a soothsayer, but that of a philosopher. According to this view, all knowledge is equivalent to all virtue, a position that Socrates is willing to admit elsewhere, but does not help us distinguish the nature of courage. In this part of the dialogue, the contrast between Laches and Socrates' methods of cross-examination, as well as the way Laches' definition of courage begins to align with Nicias, is worth noting. Thus, despite some hints at the connection and unity of virtue and knowledge, no clear conclusion is reached. The two aspects of courage are never reconciled. True indications of the nature of courage do emerge. 1. Courage is both moral and physical. 2. True courage is inseparable from knowledge, and yet, 3. It is based on an instinct. Laches represents one aspect of courage, while Nicias represents the other. The perfect image and harmony of both aspects is only realized in Socrates himself. This dialogue is an example of Plato's freedom in treating facts. The scene is supposed to have taken place between 424 BC, the year of the Battle of Delium, and 418 BC, the year of the Battle of Mantinea, in which Laches died. However, if Socrates were over 70 years old at his trial in 399 BC, see Apology, he could not have been a young man after the Battle of Delium.